Something big is breaking in China right now, and it's not coming from the outside. No sanctions, no naval blockade, no trade war escalation. This is coming from the inside, from the very men who were supposed to hold the system together. In late January of 2026, China's second most powerful military commander, a man who'd known Xi Jinping since childhood, was dragged from power without warning. His phone seized, his allies frozen out, his decades of loyalty suddenly worth nothing. That wasn't a corruption cleanup. That was a ruler who no longer trusts his own army. And when a dictator starts fearing the people with the guns, well, history tells us exactly what happens next. In this video, we break down the fracture tearing through China's power structure, why this purge is unlike anything we've seen since Mao, and why the fallout won't stay inside Beijing's walls. Let's get into it. Now, on January 24th of 2026, China's defense ministry made a terse announcement that sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency on the planet. General Zhang Yuxia, vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, the body that commands China's entire 2 million strong armed forces, was under investigation for serious violations of discipline and law. That's Beijing's coded language. It means you're done. But Zhang wasn't just any general. He was a princeling, the son of a revolutionary elder who fought alongside Xi Jinping's own father during the Communist Revolution. Zhang and Xi had known each other since boyhood. They grew up together in the shadow of the party. Zhang was one of the last Chinese generals with actual combat experience, having fought in the brutal 1979 war against Vietnam. He was battle-tested in a military where almost no active commander has ever heard a shot fired in anger. And he was the man that Xi personally elevated to the highest military post beneath his own and kept in power past retirement age specifically because Xi trusted him. Trusted. Yeah, past tense. As recently as December of 2025, Zhang was standing beside Xi at officer promotion ceremonies. He survived multiple previous rounds of anti-corruption sweeps through the military. He was, by every measure, the safest man in the Chinese military outside of Xi himself. And now, gone. Just like that. But Zhang wasn't alone. General Liu Zhenli, the chief of staff of the CMC Joint Staff Department, the man responsible for the military's day-to-day operational command and the entire C4 ISR capability, meaning communications, intelligence, and surveillance, was purged alongside him. Two of the most powerful military figures in all of China removed in a single stroke. But here's what makes this terrifying. The Central Military Commission normally has 7 members. After years of rolling purges, the Rocket Force commanders in 2023, defense ministers Li Shangfu and Wei Fenghe, expelled from the party, 9 more senior officers ousted at the October 2025 plenum. The commission has now been gutted down to just 2, Xi Jinping himself and General Zhang Shengmi, a career political commissar with really zero combat experience, whose main qualification is that he runs the military's internal discipline machine. He doesn't command troops, he investigates them. He holds files on everyone. That's not a leadership structure. That's a dictator and his inquisitor, standing alone on top of the world's largest army. The official PLA daily editorial accused Zhang Yuxia and Liu of seriously trampling on the chairman responsibility system, which is party speak for challenging Xi's personal absolute authority. They were accused of gravely betraying the trust and expectations of the Communist Party, not of stealing money, not of incompetence, but of political disloyalty. And that distinction matters more than anything, because this tells us something the Chinese government desperately doesn't want the world to know. The regime, it's not unified, it's fracturing. And the fracture runs straight through the heart of China's power. For decades, the outside world has looked at China and seen a monolith. One party, one leader, one army, all marching in lockstep. That image was always a simplification, but it used to be close enough to the truth, but not anymore. Today, China's power is splitting into 3 distinct forces, each pulling in a different direction. Xi Jinping, obsessed with personal control and his own legacy, the Chinese Communist Party apparatus, a sprawling bureaucratic machine with 98 million members whose only real goal is its own survival, and the People's Liberation Army, a 2 million strong military that wants to modernize, that wants to be taken seriously as a fighting force, but keeps getting gutted by political witch hunts from the very leadership that it's supposed to serve. These 3 used to be aligned. Now they're diverging in ways that Beijing can't paper over much longer. Xi has made himself one pole of power, separate from the party that he technically leads. He's abolished presidential term limits, which is something that even Mao's successors put in place specifically to prevent another cult of personality. He elevated Xi Jinping thought to near sacred status in the party constitution, something not seen since Mao's Little Red Book. and he's crushed every rival faction and packed the top bodies with personal loyalists. Now, on paper, it looks like total dominance. In reality, it means he's isolated himself from the institutions that are supposed to keep China running. The party, meanwhile, is paralyzed. Veteran officials have watched Xi tear up the post-Mao norms that kept the system stable for 40 years. Collective leadership, orderly succession, some degree of institutional autonomy. After Mao's disastrous rule, leaders like Deng Xiaoping deliberately built guardrails to prevent exactly this kind of personal dictatorship. Term limits, shared decision-making in the Politburo Standing Committee, an unspoken agreement that elites compete but don't destroy each other. Xi shredded every one of those guardrails. And now, behind closed doors, the bureaucracy has frozen. Not because it agrees with Xi, but because nobody dares to be the next name on a list. Provincial governors delay decisions. Economic planners now hedge their bets. Nobody wants to own a policy that might fail. Because failure under Xi doesn't just cost you your job, it might cost you your freedom. And the PLA? Well, the PLA is caught in the worst position of all. It's being asked to become a world-class fighting force, one capable of projecting power across the Pacific and possibly seizing Taiwan by 2027, all while simultaneously being stripped of its most experienced commanders and terrorized into political submission. Xi himself often warns about Soviet collapse, pointing to lax discipline and corruption as the causes. The bitter irony? Well, he's recreating exactly the kind of internal fracture that brought the Soviet system down. But here's where it gets even worse. To understand why this three-way fracture is so dangerous, you need to understand how Xi Jinping actually governs. And it comes down to one word: fear. Since taking power in 2012, Xi has launched the most sweeping purge campaign in China since Mao. Hundreds of thousands of officials have been disciplined or removed. Party cadres, provincial governors, heads of state enterprises, and especially military officers. His Tigers and Flies campaign was sold to the public as an anti-corruption crusade. And sure, corruption was real. The PLA in particular was riddled with it. Ranks and promotions routinely up for sale. Billions siphoned through rigged procurement contracts. But the purges went far beyond cleaning house. Xi systematically eliminated anyone whose loyalty he couldn't guarantee. Anyone connected to previous power networks under Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao. Anyone who might even theoretically challenge his grip. The military took the worst of it, though. Dozens of generals were arrested or sacked. The entire leadership of the Rocket Force, the branch that controls China's nuclear arsenal, gutted in 2023 amid corruption accusations that many analysts believe were pretextual. 2 consecutive defense ministers disappeared from public view and were later confirmed purged. Wei Fanghe and Li Shangfu, both expelled from the party. In a single meeting last October, 9 senior military officials were thrown out of the Communist Party in one sweep. That level of bloodletting at the top of a military really hasn't been seen since the Cultural Revolution. And here's the paradox: it's slowly destroying the system from the inside. Demanding absolute loyalty doesn't create loyalty, it creates performance. Everyone in the Chinese system now knows the rules. You echo Xi's slogans, you don't stand out, you don't question, and don't be honest if honesty might look like dissent. Officials spend more energy proving their loyalty than actually governing. Military officers sit through political indoctrination sessions when they should be running combat exercises. The entire apparatus has shifted from doing its job to surviving the next purge. That's not strength. That's a system eating itself alive. And now we come to the part of this story that changes everything. Because the PLA, it isn't just losing generals. It's losing the ability to function as a military. General Zhang Yujia wasn't purged for stealing money. He was purged, according to multiple analysts and the regime's own carefully worded language, for pushing back. Zhang was in charge of weapons development and military readiness. According to reporting from the Washington Times, citing PLA daily commentary, Zhang disagreed with Xi on the pace of military buildup toward the 2027 deadline, the politically charged date by which U.S. intelligence assessments say Xi wants the PLA ready to take Taiwan by force. And that deadline isn't a military assessment, it's a political one, tied to the PLA's 100th anniversary and Xi's own legacy. But an amphibious assault on Taiwan would be one of the most complex military operations in modern history. A crossing of over 100 miles of open water against a heavily fortified island with American backing. Professional military planners know that this requires years of preparation, realistic training, and brutally honest assessments of capability. Zhang reportedly prioritized exactly that: gradual improvement and honest evaluation over meeting a hard political timeline. He built a professional network of like-minded officers who value competence. In any normal military, that's called good leadership. In Xi's China, it's called organizing a clique, and it's a death sentence. The accusation was that he undermined the chairman's responsibility system, meaning that he didn't submit completely to Xi's personal authority. He asked hard questions. He may have told Xi that the military wasn't ready. And for that, a decorated combat veteran with 50 years of service, Xi's own childhood friend, was discarded like a threat. So what message does that send to every other officer in the PLA? Don't tell the truth. If reporting bad news gets your boss purged, you stop reporting bad news. If questioning an unrealistic timeline gets you labeled as a traitor, you fudge the numbers and say that everything is on track. If building professional relationships with subordinates makes you look like you're forming a clique, well, you isolate yourself and trust no one. That's exactly what's happening across the Chinese military right now. And it's creating an army that looks fearsome on paper, but is quietly rotting from the inside out. But you haven't heard the most alarming part yet. Because what happened after Zhang's purge reveals just how scared Beijing actually is. Not of America, not of Taiwan, not of any foreign threat, but of its own military. According to reports that leaked through dissident channels and overseas Chinese political commentators, because Beijing certainly didn't denounce this publicly, the entire PLA was placed on level 1 combat readiness after the purge. That's the highest state of alert that China has. Troops on duty around the clock. All leaves canceled. Reserve forces on standby. Units locked in position. Level 1 readiness is what you declare when war is imminent. But there was no foreign threat on China's borders in late January of 2026. No crisis in the Taiwan Strait. No clash in the South China Sea. The threat was internal. All military movements were reportedly frozen. An extraordinary order which was designed to prevent any unit from repositioning without explicit authorization from Xi's remaining loyalists. Officers across the armed forces were ordered to surrender their mobile phones for inspection, presumably to scour for evidence of disloyal communications. Then came mandatory mass political indoctrination sessions. Entire regiments and divisions pulled into assemblies, subjected to hours of loyalty lectures, forced to denounce whatever clique that Zhang was accused of leading. Normal command channels were reportedly bypassed entirely. Orders came directly from the CMC through encrypted channels, skipping the regular joint staff bureaucracy, because Xi's circle apparently didn't trust the bureaucracy to faithfully execute commands. Think about that. The world's largest military, not training for combat, not preparing for external threats, having its phones taken away and being lectured on political obedience like school children. That's not the behavior of a confident superpower. That's a regime watching its own shadow and flinching. And none of this was announced publicly. It leaked through unofficial channels, which tells you everything about how sensitive and extraordinary these measures were. Beijing doesn't want its own population, let alone the world, to know that it essentially put the entire country's military apparatus into internal lockdown. But the secrecy itself reveals the depth of the fear. They moved fast, they moved in the shadows, and they moved against their own people. China has also been quietly building an internal security apparatus for years, specifically designed to counter threats from within. Xi created a Central State Security Commission, chaired by himself, that's laser-focused on monitoring officials, tracking public sentiment, and guarding against betrayal from within the system. The domestic surveillance machine, already vast and omnipresent for ordinary citizens, now has its cameras turned inward, onto the party itself. If you're watching this far, do us a favor and hit subscribe. We track collapse as it unfolds, not after the official story catches up. Because what happens next is always the same, and it never stays internal. Every purge sends a shockwave through the ranks. When a general falls, dozens of subordinates and allies are dragged down with him, careers destroyed, networks shattered, entire departments thrown into chaos. The officers who survive don't become more loyal. They become more cautious. They stop taking risks. They avoid decisions. They wait for explicit orders so that if anything goes wrong, they can say that they were just following directions. Initiative dies. Creativity dies. The military quietly becomes less competent, even as everyone salutes and says the right things. This is exactly what happened in Stalin's Soviet Union in the 1930s. The Great Purge wiped out nearly the entire senior officer corps of the Red Army. Stalin got his loyalty, and in return, he got an army so paralyzed by fear that it nearly collapsed in the opening weeks of the German invasion in 1941. Commanders were afraid to retreat without permission, afraid to advance without authorization, afraid to think Millions died because of it. It's what happened in Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Years of coup-proofing and loyalty tests produced an army full of commanders chosen for obedience, not competence. An army that crumbled against the American invasion in 2003 despite having a massive numerical advantage on paper. And it's what's quietly happening in China right now, not with the same brutality, but with the same poisonous logic. Competence sacrificed for compliance, honest assessment replaced by political performance. Officers who should be running realistic combat exercises are instead busy proving that they're politically safe. The damage doesn't stop at the military's edge either. Across China's civilian bureaucracy, officials have absorbed the same lesson. Bold initiatives are dangerous. Honest reporting is risky. It's better to do nothing than to do something that might be misinterpreted. China's policymaking has grown visibly more erratic, sometimes bold, sometimes shockingly clumsy, because the feedback loop that corrects bad decisions have been severed by fear. Nobody tells the emperor that he has no clothes when the last person who tried was dragged from his office and never seen again. And that brings us to the question that matters most. Can this system survive? History gives us a brutally clear answer. For any authoritarian regime to remain stable, it needs three things: competent leadership that makes sound decisions under pressure, unity across institutions so that orders are carried out without factional sabotage, and trust up and down the chain so the system can respond with speed and conviction when a real crisis hits. China has lost all three. Competence has been gutted. The most experienced military commanders have been removed. One former CIA analyst warned in Foreign Affairs that while the chaos reduces near-term invasion risk, it also means that there's no one left with the stature to tell Xi to think twice if he decides to gamble on Taiwan. Decision-making gets slower and dumber with every purge. Unity is a fiction. The facade holds at party congresses and on state television, but internally, different factions hoard information to protect themselves. Military and civilian leaders eye each other as rivals. And in a genuine crisis, you can already predict the outcome. Conflicting responses, paralysis, everyone waiting to see which way the wind blows before committing. And trust is gone. Xi doesn't trust his generals don't trust him. The party doesn't trust the military's loyalty. And the military doesn't trust the party's judgment. Officials won't admit problems because admitting a problem means being blamed for causing it. A system without competence, unity, or trust doesn't collapse on a schedule. It chugs along on inertia, masked by propaganda and public compliance. But when a real crisis arrives, an economic shock, a botched military operation, a wave of civil unrest, the whole thing can unravel faster than anyone predicted. That's what happened to the Soviet Union in 1991. A hardline coup attempt paralyzed the center. Nobody knew who was in charge. The republics peeled away within days. A superpower that looked permanent on Monday was functionally gone by Friday. Nobody outside saw it coming, except the analysts who'd been watching the internal decay for years. China's national unity is stronger than the Soviet Union's was, but the fault lines run deep when trust is absent. And the potential triggers are everywhere. A property market that's already in freefall. A demographic crisis that's only accelerating. A military being pushed toward a Taiwan confrontation that it may not be ready for. And a leader who is systematically running out of people to trust. And here's the cruelest irony of all. Even a war, the very thing that Xi is building toward, can become the trigger for collapse. If the PLA launches an operation against Taiwan under political pressure and it goes badly, will commanders in the field be honest about losses? Or will they hide setbacks to save face, leading to worse defeats? Will Xi double down and order something reckless? A military disaster has toppled authoritarian governments before. Argentina's junta fell after the Falklands War. In China's case, a failed military adventure could expose every internal fracture simultaneously, with consequences that ripple across the entire globe. The exact moment of rupture, it's unpredictable. It could be a black swan that nobody sees coming. But the process has already started. Decay of trust, decay of competence, decay of unity. It's slow, and it's mostly invisible to the outside world, but it's happening right now. Behind the walls of Zhongnanhai and the PLA barracks across the country, something big is breaking in China. Not from outside, but from within. A house divided against itself, where the ruler fears the army doubts the ruler, and the party has blinded itself with ideology. Cannot stand forever. The men with the guns may no longer believe in the people giving the orders, and when that belief finally breaks, Change, it doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door down. We've seen it before, we'll see it again. The only question is timing, and whether the world is paying attention when it happens. So what do you think? Is Xi tightening his grip on power or tightening the noose around his own neck? Will the fracture stay contained, or are we watching the early stages of something that the world isn't ready for? Let us know in the comments, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Fall of Nations. Because when a story breaks wide open, we'll be the first ones covering it.